Well, good afternoon, everybody. Glad you could make it for our first official executive lecture of this semester. And I think you're in for a real, wow, that's even better. I think you're in for a real treat today. Today we have with us Mr. Howard Headlee, who is president of the Utah Bankers Association. And I'd like to say a few things to you, share with you his official bio. But before I do that, I think one of the things you ought to know about Mr. Headlee is, in addition to kind of being a great business type, he's also a great community type. And I think that's important as we think about your careers, as you think about your careers in business, not only this ability to kind of create businesses that make money and employ people and do great things like that, but also developing a skill set that you can then return back to the community and share with them in promoting causes and events and things that are important to you and are important to the community. And I think Mr. Headlee's a great example of that. So let me go ahead and get into his bio a little bit now. Mr. Headlee was appointed President and Chief Executive Officer of the Utah Bankers Association in April of 1997. And this is a trade association that serves the banking industry of Utah. And so basically its membership consists of, you might guess it, all the nationally chartered banks, the savings banks, the FDIC insured industrial banks from throughout the state of Utah. Prior to that, Mr. Headlee served 6 years as the Vice President of the Utah Taxpayers Association, and prior to that, he worked in Detroit with a very important accounting firm, KPMG Pete Marwick, which certainly you'll have heard of. And in that realm, he was an auditor specializing in the area of financial institutions. Mr. Headlee is a graduate of that small school down the street called BYU. Their School of Accountancy. He also earned a master's degree at Business Administration from the University of Utah, and so we're counting on him to earn his PhD from Utah Valley University as soon as we start one. He's the founder and chairman of the American Preparatory Academy, which is one of the largest and most successful public charter schools in the state of Utah. He also serves as chairman of the Artistic Resource for Teachers and Students, a nonprofit organization committed to maintaining the influence of fine arts in Utah's elementary schools. He's also chairman of the Utah Center for Affordable Housing. He's also served as chairman of the Legislative Policy Committee for the Utah Partnership for Education and Economic Development. And so again, I hope you took note not only of his kind of professional activities, but also how he's leveraged those professional skills that he's developed into doing good things for the community. Mr. Headlee's also, along with his wife, Tana, the parents of 6 children. They live in Sandy, Utah. So I know you came here to hear him, not me. So without further ado, Mr. Headlee.
Well, it's an honor to be here today. I'm just seeing if my daughter has shown up yet. Her and her fiance attends here in the business school, and so look forward to having him here. I guess I'm not allowed to walk around, but I saw them tearing a building down, a gang of men in a busy town. With a yo-heave-ho and a lusty yell, they swung a beam and the sidewall fell. I asked the foreman if these men were as skilled as those he'd hire if he were to build. He said, "Oh, no, indeed. Common labor's all I need. For they can wreck in a day or two what builders have taken years to do." So I asked myself as I went my way, which of these roles am I to play? Am I the wrecker who walks the town, content in the role of tearing down? Or am I the builder who works with care, measuring life by the rule and square? When my friend Randy Beckham called and asked me to come here today and speak to you, I was honored and I was excited to do it. I always look forward to the opportunity to speak to people who have committed themselves to being builders. I work for builders, I work with builders, and I jumped at the opportunity to come be with you today because you've shown a commitment to measuring life by the rule and square, to prepare yourself to work with care, to build your communities, to build your lives, and to build your careers. So it's an honor to be here today. I'm a little overwhelmed because I'm not sure exactly what I might say that would help you, that would warrant you all sitting there dutifully taking notes. But I'm honored that you're doing that. I'm sure you're probably answering some emails too, but and that's fine. I did turn off my Twitter so I won't be distracted, but I'll understand if you've got things to do. Randy suggested that maybe I should talk a little bit about my personal background, how I got here. I think that'll explain. I'm going to take a little bit of time talking about the lessons I've learned along that way. And then I will talk a little bit about the financial crisis and the banking industry. And as we move along, I'll have a hard time seeing hands, I'm afraid. But feel free to raise your hand and ask a question throughout the next hour. And then at the end, I'll try to leave some time, and maybe they can bring the house lights up, and I might see you more clearly. Let me just dive into a little personal background. I was born and raised just outside of Detroit, Michigan. And let me just show you that when people think of Detroit, Michigan, they don't necessarily think of this. But the fact of the matter is Michigan is a beautiful state, lots of lakes, lots of trees. I'm a long-suffering Detroit Tigers, Lions. Red Wings have been a little more successful, and I will admit that at times I did root for the bad boys, the Detroit Pistons, but I've since reformed, and I now root for the Utah Jazz. My father was a huge influence in my life, and the poem that I started with, you'll hear some other poems and some thoughts today, but when I got this invitation, I thought to myself, what would my dad say? He was a great builder, and see if I can, there we go. He was a great man, great businessman, a great community man. I think my involvement in the community that you referred to is really just a reflection of how he raised me. Very active in the community. He led a charge to amend the Michigan State Constitution, first time it's ever been amended. It's called the Headlee Amendment. It's still in force today, and it still limits government growth and spending every year, every day of the year. In 1982, he ran for governor of Michigan, was Republican nominee for governor, and I was very active on that campaign, and it had a big influence on my life because it was a very nasty campaign. I grew up about 2 miles from where Jimmy Hoffa was abducted, and in politics in Michigan, it's very rough, and people feel very strongly about their views. We had state troopers that lived with us in our basement. They drove us everywhere we went. Our house was evacuated in the middle of the night with bomb threats. I love politics, but not that much. And so when we lost a very narrow election in 1982, and I decided that I was going to go to college in Utah and not Michigan. That was his company, the Alexander Hamilton Life Insurance Company in Michigan. Growing up in Michigan, though, I fancied myself a musician. I had an agent. I spent the summers in Fort Lauderdale playing in his bars. It was an exciting lifestyle in limousines and in his studio. We recorded an album of music that I wrote. Back then, I'll date myself, when you did an album, you pressed it on vinyl and one of those big LPs, but I'm proud of that. I still have it. I don't have anything to play it on. But I got burned out in music, and so I decided that I would go on a mission. I went to Argentina for a couple years, and when I returned, I went to BYU and decided to major in accounting. And I would guess that it seemed strange to me as well, but the fact is accounting was my worst subject. I hated it. I was bad at it, and I figured if I was going to be any good in business, I better get better at it. BYU has a pretty good accounting school, and so I applied and got in, and it was really one of the toughest things I've ever done. It was at that time that I actually came here and took a number of classes, as I think a lot of students do, and this campus has changed dramatically. It's just beautiful how it's grown. It's a beautiful school, and I have very fond memories of coming to, at that time, what was called Utah Valley State College. Sorry to put up the old logo. I know that's a branding conflict, but that's what it was when I was here, and that tells you just about how old I am. After I graduated, my wife and I moved back to Detroit. I actually got married the day after my last exam. Packed up the car and drove to Detroit and went to work for General Motors for a while in the accounting and reporting section. That was fascinating to see the numbers that came in there every month, just huge numbers. Never seen anything like it. They had special 10 keys. It was just incredible. Then I went to work for KPMG and focused on financial institutions. After a couple of years, my wife and I and my oldest daughter, who I think might be here, moved back to Utah and enrolled in the University of Utah, and I got my MBA from there. And while I was at MBA school, I served an internship up at the Utah State Legislature with the Utah Taxpayers Association, and I really liked it. It kind of blended my background in accounting and my background in politics, and Utah politics was really kind of wonderful. People are nice, not a lot of bomb threats, and I really enjoyed it. And after coming out of MBA school, I took a job full-time with the Taxpayers Association, and the main reason there was that I felt it was a great opportunity to meet a lot of leaders in the state and network. I wasn't from Utah, and this was a great way to plant my roots. And it worked out well. A few years later, I was selected to serve as the president of the Utah Bankers Association. That was about 14 years ago. And I absolutely love what I do. I love the people I work for. The bankers are just some of the greatest people in our community. They're committed to building our community. They've taken a really bad rap over the last few years, and I'm going to talk about that. I love the legislators that I work with. They're good people. They're part-time legislators. They're committed to building our state, and they really do a heck of a job for us. So I love what I do, and one of the reasons I really love what I do is they give me the ability and the flexibility to get involved in the community. And as noted, my daughter walks in the Detroit Tiger cap. Thanks, Ashley. As the bio suggested, I get to be involved in a lot of really important things in our community, and I absolutely love it. Affordable housing has been a big subject over the last few years as the housing bubble went up, and now as it's come down, we're buying a lot of properties and redeploying them in the affordable sector for folks. There's refugees that get sent here by the federal government every month, and we've got to find a place for them to live, and it's a really tough transition for these folks. Frankly, they don't know how a lot of things that we use work, toilets, ovens. So I'm involved in that, and as I got aware of the refugee community, I realized they had some serious educational needs. Most of them have lived in tents for the last 10 years waiting for their number to come up. A lot of them have. And so about 8 years ago, my sisters and I started a charter school called the American Preparatory Academy in Draper, Utah. We've had great success, thousands of kids waiting to get into school. And so when I saw the refugee situation, we decided to build a campus last year. We opened the American Preparatory Academy School for New Americans. And we focus on serving the refugee population. And it's really probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. And anybody who ever wants to come up and visit the school, you're welcome to. It's in West Valley. But it's just an exciting place to be. As I speak, we're working on financing to build our third campus in West Valley next year. So I'm really excited about that. Education is a passion for me. My wife and I, Tana and I, have 6 kids now. We live in Sandy, and we absolutely love it here in Utah. We just find it's a great place for us to raise our kids. These are our 2 youngest, Olivia and Spencer, and we have a lot of fun with them. So before I move on, that was my background. I got it out of the way. I hope it wasn't too boring. Any questions about that? Yes?
How do you go about fundraising to build a campus that size with what specific fundraising activities do you do?
In the charter school? Well, we do some fundraising, but in terms of construction, first campus we worked out with the developer, and he actually built it, and we leased it from him. I helped him work with the city council to develop the rest of his parcel, and in return he financed the building of our building and leased it back to us, and we're refinancing that right now. Now, 8 years later, the markets are a lot more sophisticated, and we can go out and actually issue bonds. And we issued bonds for that school through the Tax-Free Fund of Utah, which is a great fund. And we're refinancing that right now as well with what's called a New Market Tax Credit. We were the only charter school in the state, and one of only a couple in the country that received a qualified school construction bond allocation. And that's a bond where the federal government pays the interest on the bond. It was part of the stimulus package a couple years ago, the ARRA. And we were honored to get that, and that's what we're trying to use for our third campus. So the fundraising we do is primarily for things like playgrounds, the things that frankly we can't justify because it's not focused specifically on the academics, and especially for the new School for New Americans, we have to devote every penny of resources we have to breaking them into very small groups and teaching them English and math at the level they're at. Regardless of their age, we break them into really small groups and teach them those things. So that's what we fundraise for. And we really just write grants, and we go to partners in the community. A lot of banks, as you might imagine. I ask for money. So any other questions? I'm sure somebody's wondering why I didn't have any pictures of my rock and roll days. But that's because I'm president of the Bankers Association now. Oh, somebody looked that up. Okay. All righty. Well, if I could, and I'll try not to wander too much, but I really want this to be more interactive. I want to ask a question that will help me a little bit today. Why are you here today? What's that? To hear me speak. Well, I'm flattered. Thank you. I've heard a number of people walk in and say, "Who's the speaker today?" So I know that's not the case for some of you. Anybody?
Good ideas of where I want to go for the rest of my life.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Any other?
In order to get this class passed, I have to be here.
No, I love honesty.
What I found is, me personally, being able to interview entrepreneurs and executives is 20 times more valuable than reading a book written by them. So this is the same thing as almost doing here, asking questions. It's learning from you, from your actual experiences. So
Thank
that's
you.
why I'm here. That's why I took this class.
The pressure's really on now. Anybody else? I love the first answer, frankly, because that's a lot more like me.
I want to get your view on the housing/banking situation. I returned from Detroit just a year and a half ago. So
Boy,
I know the housing market's definitely an issue across the nation. And since you have that firsthand experience, I'd like to get your take on that and what can be done to improve that
okay.
stable, long-term mindset.
Well, hopefully we'll get to that today. I think we will. Yeah? Yeah, in the red shirt.
I think you can see, well, all of us here, I think we can see that academia is kind of a synthetic environment. And I like this. I want to see what the real world's like. I want to see who we should emulate, why we should try to become more like, hopefully, the speakers that will be here. So we can get into the real world and then back and hopefully inspire people that this isn't the real world. It's just to help people get into it.
That's fascinating. I appreciate that. That helps me a lot. Now, honestly, I expected more of the first answer. Maybe some of you were thinking that. When I was in school, especially when I was here, in fact, that's why I was here, I looked at school like a checklist. It's like, hey, I want to graduate, I want to have a career, I want to get a job, I want to start a family, and this is what I needed to do, and so I needed to do this, and these are the classes I had to take. It was all outlined, and this is, I understand, is a kind of a required class, so this is on the checklist. And I hustled from class to class, typically a few minutes late, if any of my teachers are still here, and checked all the checks off the checklist and got my degree. In fact, the reason I was here is because at BYU, the 3 classes I need to get into the accounting school, I couldn't take at the same time. I could take them at the same time here and they transfer. So I saved a year and a half off my checklist by coming here and taking 3 classes at the same time. That's the BYU bureaucracy at work. So that's why I was here. It was all about a checklist, and I graduated and I went back to work and I went to Pete Marwick and we worked really long hours, 12, 14-hour days, traveled sometimes more. And I saw a lot of businesses, and I ran into a lot of situations that frankly I didn't know about, I didn't understand, I didn't learn about in school, but I didn't have time to research it. So I kept a notebook, and when I heard a term or when I heard a concept or something I didn't quite get, I played along, I bluffed, I winged it, and I wrote it in this notebook, always thinking that I was going to have time to go back and research it. Now, we didn't have Google when I was just out of college, so it was a little bit harder, and I frankly never had the time. I had a new wife, I had a new daughter, and things got busy. So when I went back to school at the University of Utah, it was kind of like recess. It sounds strange. As strange as it sounds, I was able to pull out my notebook and say, this is what I want to learn. I got to learn more about this. I got to learn more about that. And I looked at the classes that were required, and sometimes I took classes that weren't required. Is that crazy? But it was a totally different perspective. I didn't loathe my homework. I got better grades. And it was a great experience. I grew, I stretched, and I learned things that not only made me a better business person, but made me a better person. And I want to talk about one of those opportunities that I had at MBA school. When I got to MBA school, I was looking at a bunch of classes, and I saw this one class called the Motivator Hygiene Theory. Whole class about the Motivator Hygiene Theory. I remember studying in school, but how do you have a whole class on the Motivator Hygiene Theory? Anybody know what that is? Anybody heard about that course? Anybody? Yeah. The thing that was interesting, I want to come back to you in a second. The thing that was interesting about it, it was being taught by Frederick Hertzberg. Anybody who knows anything about the motivational hygiene theory realizes that Frederick Hertzberg is the guy that developed the theory. And I was thinking, oh man, it's a 1-day-a-week class. Now, what does that mean? No, it was long. It was like 3 hours long, and it was in the evening. And I'm thinking, well, I don't want to do that. I got my wife and my daughter, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to take a class from the guy that developed the theory. So I showed up to class the first day, and the guy was, I don't know how old, maybe 80, 90. And he came in, and he leaned up against this, and he stayed like this the whole time. And the first couple of classes, I stayed awake just because we were all anxious to see if he was going to make it through the 3 hours. And he would gasp and, and make all these bizarre sounds. It took 3 hours to get about 1 hour worth of material in, but it was fascinating. And after a while, I sat and said, why is he here? Why are you here? Why is he here? Why is he teaching students about this theory? And I was fascinated by it. So tell me, what do you know about the theory? Let's just quickly talk about it.
Doesn't have to do with motivating somebody at their work, and what takes away from it, what adds to it, their satisfaction.
Yeah, it's about job satisfaction. It's about motivating people in work and what motivates them. And, there's people that take shots at the theory. It's a theory, right? But I learned a lot of important things about it. But it's very simple. Basically, what he says is the things that make us happy are entirely different from the things that make us sad. Does that sound weird, simple? Think about it. The things that make us happy are different from the things that make us sad. He basically said, what's the opposite of being happy? Anyone? Being sad, right? Not true. The opposite of being happy is not being happy. And the opposite of sad is not being sad. Am I getting this right, Professor?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Now bear with me a little bit here. The point is that the things, instead of a single bipolar continuum between happiness and sadness, you have two distinct continua. You've got the happiness one and the sadness one. The satisfaction one and the dissatisfaction one is what you were referring to. And what he identified is the things that drive the happiness or the motivator continuum are entirely different than the very things that drive the hygiene continuum. right? Motivator, hygiene, the motivator hygiene theory. Okay, so here I am in college, and why was this important to me? Let me just finish off. The motivators are things like relationships, achievements, growth, responsibility. Those are the things that give us satisfaction and happiness in life. The hygienes are things like money, food, shelter. Okay? If you don't have them, you're going to be sad. But you can have them in droves. It's never going to make you happy. Okay? So his point is, you need to do the things in your life that minimize your sadness and maximize your happiness once you identify what those two different things are. The people who stay focused on just the hygiene continuum in their life are called pain avoiders. They just want to avoid pain in life. That's their goal. They don't want any discomfort, dissatisfaction. And what I'm here to say is that we're much more than pain avoiders. We have to be much more than pain avoiders. But as students, we're in kind of a hygiene mode in life. We're in a hygiene transition. I'm painting a broad brush. But when I was a student, I was in hygiene transition. My parents had provided me food, clothing, shelter. And I was in college to get a degree so I could get a job so that I could provide myself and my family food, clothing, and shelter. So I was very focused on hygienes. And I was doing okay. Good job, decent car, shelter, but I wasn't happy. And sitting in Frederick Kirchberg's class, I realized why. And it changed my life. It was a class I didn't need to take. But because I was in that growth exploratory mode, it made all the difference. So given the fact that some of you might be in that hygiene mode, I wanted to stretch and challenge you. And I wanted to emphasize and focus my presentation today on what is, I think, one of the most important motivators in our lives and a key to happiness and success in business. And I will tell you that you will look back someday on this time, and some of you don't have to look back because it sounds like you've got it together. But you'll look back and you'll find out there was one thing that was far more important than all the things that you learned here. You're here, you're going to learn a ton of things, but there's one thing looking back that you'll find that is far more important than all those things. Does anybody have a guess as to what that is? This guy gets an A, whatever it is. Go ahead.
What I'm noticing is the behaviors and habits that I'm creating, of how I'm listening, communicating with people, and getting things done. That's kind of what I realized is most important. Coming out of the business arena for a while to do this.
Yep. I want to focus on a very specific behavior. Anybody else have any ideas? There's a hand.
I'd say learning to enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. This is part of that. Anybody else? Yeah?
Are you referring to relationships or networking that we make along the way?
Absolutely. That's what I'm talking about. Well, I'm in the wrong place. Talking about relationships. Relationships are what make the economy go. They're what make the world go. They're what make your church go. It's what makes your community go. It's all about relationships. And as I look back on my time at this university and at BYU, I didn't realize that. I didn't take advantage of that. Now, we're better at it today. We got Facebook, we got LinkedIn. We got great tools that you can use to build networks and to keep them and nurture them, protect them. But are you taking the time to do it, I guess is my question. Because not only is that the key to your business success and the success of your communities, it really is going to be the key to your personal happiness. Those are the things that are going to last. So look around as you hustle and bustle between classes, as you're sitting in the cafeteria or the computer lab or here today, and don't move so fast. Identify people that you want to meet. People that are different than you. People that have different strengths and weaknesses. Build your networks. That will be the longest lasting thing. I have no idea what grades I got. I can't remember my GPA, and I'm sure, I mean, a lot of the things that I learned are important to who I am, but the people I met and the people that I worked with are people that I still talk to today and people that help me. And when I need help raising money or things like that for a good cause, it's just absolutely critical that we don't get so caught up in that checklist that we look past relationships. Alrighty, I want to talk a little bit about the financial crisis, but I will tell you we're not changing the topic. Before I get to banking 101, I just want to say that the economy and the financial crisis is all about relationships. And in the last year or two, there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation in the media. So if most of your information you've gotten about what's happened in the world has come from cable news, especially, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. There's some good books out there to read about the meltdown and the bailout and so forth like that. I'd urge you to read them. Because what happened behind the scenes was far more interesting and way different than what was being reported on the news. I want to start with the word bank. 90% of the time you hear the word bank on the news, they're not even talking about a bank. Okay? Merrill Lynch wasn't a bank. AIG isn't a bank. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, not a bank. The only institution that can use the word bank in its name legally is an institution that has applied for and received federal deposit insurance from the FDIC. That's the only institution that can call itself a bank. What does a bank do? It's very simple. A bank is a financial intermediary. And after getting an accounting degree and MBA, it's amazing what I didn't know about banking. And so maybe I'm being redundant here, but let me just talk about it quickly. Banks as an intermediary, basically there are people in the world that have money and there are people that need money. And somebody has to balance those interests, balance those risks, and while someone's not using their money, deploy their money in a way that builds our community and our economy. And that's what a bank does, but has to balance the risk. And people say, well, I went to the bank and they wouldn't give me a loan. Can you believe that? That's a great business plan. I had a great business plan coming out of college, and I was really smart. I had an MBA, and the bank told me, this is a true story, hey, we're not going to give you a loan. It was the greatest thing that they ever did. I didn't know why, I was mad, but now I understand it. A bank can take about as much risk on the loan side as it can take, as the 80-year-old widow is willing to take on her deposit. You got to match those risks up. The government guarantees that deposit, so the government steps in and is very interested in how we lend money because they don't want us lending money and assuming more risk than what they have to bear by guaranteeing that 80-year-old her deposits. So that's the world of banking. It may seem kind of boring in that regard. It's not investment banking. We don't make investments in companies, equity-type investments. We lend against cash flow or asset values or both in order to make sure that that 80-year-old has her money when she needs it. That's what banking is. And it's a very important function, that function of being an intermediary. I'm going to quickly run through, maybe I'm not. I'm going to run through this. This is really boring. This is Banking 101. It's very important, but we don't have time to do it, and I think you'll think it is way too much like a class if I start getting into ratios and such. But what I want to show you is that at a 10% capital ratio, we'll raise $1 million. We start a bank. You collect $9 million in deposits, you can make $10 million in loans. That's how our balance sheet works. Our assets are our loans, our liabilities are our deposits, and the capital is our capital, our equity. When we lose $100,000 on a loan in equity, look what happens. Our capital drops to $900,000, and if we maintain a 10% capital ratio, our loans drop from $10 million to $9 million. So a $100,000 loss leads to $1 million loss in lending. So as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, we've lost a lot of capital, and we've lost a ton of lending capacity. And when the regulators step in and say, we want to take your capital from 10 to 12%, look at what happens to our loans. So now we've gone from 10 million in loans. We lost $100,000. Between that loss and the regulators, we got 7.5 million in loans to make. Now you magnify that by the hundreds of billions in capital that has been lost, and you can see that we've lost trillions of dollars in lending capacity. And in a capitalist economy, that's significant. But what is probably more significant, and what was at the root of this problem, are personal relationships of trust. We not only destroyed capital, we destroyed trust. And the secondary markets that we had that were so brilliant, where people all over the world could deploy their capital in worthy causes all over the world because very good intermediaries were deploying that capital on their behalf, all came to a grinding halt because trust. A handful of people were making loans that shouldn't have been made. They were bundling them in packages and selling them as something they weren't. And the fact is that most banks, the banks that I represent, didn't make the loans. We bought a lot of them because we thought they were AAA rated securities. But we didn't make those loans. And we didn't package them and sell them for something they weren't. When my dad, and I'll go back to that real quick, had a heart transplant when I was at BYU. He got a virus and his heart stopped working. And he got a heart transplant. He was one of the first heart transplant recipients here in Utah. And he lived a long time with his heart. He didn't die of heart failure. His heart was younger than mine when he died. Well, it was younger than mine, his new heart. He died of liver failure. And his liver failed because when they did the heart transplant, he got blood that had hepatitis C in it because we weren't screening the blood supply for hepatitis C back in the late 80s when he got the transplant. And the financial crisis was very similar. We had a beautiful secondary market that we were able to take capital and leverage it all over the world very efficiently until some bozos, jokers, whatever, started to inject a poison into the system, just like that hepatitis C into the blood supply. And all of a sudden, people around the world said, "Hey, I'm going to keep my capital right here because I don't know." It's like you were running a marathon in a desert, and you got to the end, and there was a table with 10 glasses of cold, clear water. And you're like, "I got to have a drink." And you went to grab, and they said, "Wait, before you take a drink, I got to tell you something. Out of those 10 glasses, one is filled with poison. And the moment it touches your lips, you will die. Can't tell you which one it is, and you can't tell. But just want you to know, one of them has poison in it." How many glasses are you going to drink? None. And 90% of the loans out there were good, but you didn't know which ones they were. So all of a sudden, no one wanted to invest their capital. It all comes back to relationships of trust. And we've had some serious damage in that department. I've learned a lot of lessons over the years about how to build relationships of trust. And the first one I want to talk about is something my dad used to tell me. This is the number one relationship killer in any aspect of your life. If you can't say something nice about somebody, don't say anything at all. Just don't say it. Write this down. Put it on your wall. It doesn't do any good. If somebody's an idiot, everybody knows it. You don't have to say it. It's the fool that says it. You never know when that relationship is something you're going to need. Doesn't do any good. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Okay? The next one is the best relationship builder. This was on every mirror in my house growing up. When I brush my teeth, brush my hair, wash my hands, get ready for a date, whatever. I saw this. Say something nice about someone today. The number one relationship builder. So as you focus on your relationships and building and nurturing relationships of trust, every great leader understands the power of a compliment. And the more detailed and specific the compliment it is, the more powerful that compliment is. All righty. I'm almost out of time. I want to finish up by talking about leadership. Each of us at this point in time in our lives has a real good idea of what we know we can do. You've had experiences You know what you can do. You've maybe had some failures. You've kind of found that boundary, and that's what we call the comfort zone, right? We know what we can do. But there's a place beyond what you know you can do, and that's what we're called upon to do, or what needs to be done. And that's the place where I challenge you, taking a quote from the movie Hitch. You live here. All right? This is a place where we grow. This is a place where we stretch. This is a place where our companies need us. This is a place where our communities need us. The ultimate success of any person is simply a reflection of the amount of their life they spend in this place. Now, if you're looking to avoid pain, that's what the comfort zone's for. If you're looking to find happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment, growth, achievement, the things that really make you happy, you live there. That's my challenge to you today. My dad only gave me one piece of advice. I kept asking him for it. He said, I'm not going to give it to you. The reason why advice isn't worth anything is because the supply of it is way exceeds the demand. And he felt like people didn't take his advice, so he just didn't give it. He gave me one piece of advice, and he said, Howard, don't stop taking risks. He said, most people by the time they're 40 years old have found that comfort zone, and they've stopped taking risks. He said, never stop taking risks. My dad was an incredible example of this. When he was 35 years old, he had seven kids. I'm number 8. He had 7 kids. He was selling shoes, and he lived in a basement of a house in Bountiful. He got involved in a group in his community called the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the JCs. And he was elected as the president of the Utah JCs, late 30s. He went back to the National JC Convention and got crazy and got elected as the National JC president. And he picked up his family of 7 kids and moved them to Tulsa, Oklahoma, someplace he'd never been before. He lived there for a year as a president of the National JCs. And he traveled all over the country, met a lot of people, and he had a job offer in Michigan when his term of 1 year was up. So he packed up his 7 kids and his pregnant wife, pregnant with me, and moved to Michigan, a place he'd never been, had no family, had no support system. Took the job. Volunteered for a guy named George Romney, who was governor of Michigan at the time. Great man. Ended up running George Romney's presidential campaign in 1968. Meeting George Romney, living in this space, made all the difference in his world, even though he was over 40 at this point, and had 8 kids and all kinds of reasons to be safe and to avoid pain and get in his comfort zone, even though it wasn't a very comfortable place. He kept taking risks. After that presidential campaign, he got a job. He became president of Alexander Hamilton Life Insurance Company for 25 years. He was a leader in the community, and he lived his whole life, whether it was his business career or his community or church, he lived his whole life there, and it showed, and it mattered, and he made a difference. So let me just leave you by challenging you to get out of your comfort zone. Live in that place between what you know you can do and what you're called upon to do. Live your whole lives there. Don't stop taking risks. You're much more than pain avoiders. Get past the checklists and build relationships of trust. Nurture those relationships of trust. The world is driven by relationships. It's not only the key to business success and success in your community, but it's the key to your personal happiness. Beware of the number one killer of relationships. If you don't have something nice to say about somebody, just don't say it at all. And learn and embrace the power of a compliment. Say something nice about someone today. Because you'll never know when someone will catch a dream from you. You never know when a little word or something that you might do will open up the windows to a mind that seeks the light. The things you do may not matter at all, but then again, they might. And if by chance it may be that another's life through you could possibly change for the better with a brighter point of view, I guess it might be worth a chance at pointing the way to the right. Of course, it may not matter at all, but then again, it might. I assure you that the relationships that you build here and throughout your life matter. Build them, guard them, protect them with all you have. Thank you for your time today. I hope this was helpful.